The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravenswood Palace as Lady Catherine Blackwood adjusted the stunning emerald necklace around her throat. The precious stones caught the light streaming through the tall windows, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the ornate walls of her chambers. This was no ordinary piece of jewelry. It was the legendary Tears of Avalon, a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations of Blackwood women for over 3 centuries. Lady Catherine had inherited the necklace from her grandmother just 2 years ago, along with a letter that spoke of its mysterious powers and ancient history. The emeralds were said to have been blessed by the first Queen of Avalon, and legend claimed they could protect the wearer from harm and bring prosperity to the kingdom. Whether or not these stories were true, Catherine treasured the necklace not for any magical properties, but because it was her last connection to her beloved grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a terrible carriage accident when she was just 7 years old. Today was particularly special because Princess Eleanor, the kingdom's heir apparent, was hosting a grand celebration in honor of the autumn harvest. The entire royal court would be in attendance, including foreign dignitaries, wealthy merchants, and the most influential nobles from across the realm. Lady Catherine had spent weeks preparing for this event, carefully selecting her gown and ensuring every detail of her appearance would be perfect. The emerald necklace was the crown jewel of her ensemble, and she knew it would draw admiring glances from everyone in the ballroom. As she made her way through the palace corridors toward the grand ballroom, Lady Catherine felt confident and radiant. The silk of her deep burgundy gown rustled softly with each step, and the weight of the emerald necklace felt comforting against her collarbone. She had grown up in these halls playing hide-and-seek with Princess Eleanor when they were children, and later learning the complex rules of court etiquette together. Despite the difference in their stations, they had remained close friends throughout their youth, though royal duties had gradually created some distance between them in recent years. The ballroom was already filling with guests when Lady Catherine arrived. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Musicians played softly in one corner, while servants in crisp uniforms moved gracefully between the guests, offering glasses of champagne and delicate canapes. The air was filled with the gentle hum of conversation, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. Tapestries depicting the kingdom's glorious history adorned the walls, and fresh flowers from the royal gardens had been arranged in elaborate displays throughout the room. Lady Catherine quickly spotted several familiar faces among the crowd. Lord Pemberton was engaged in animated conversation with the French ambassador, while Lady Worthington was showing off her new diamond bracelet to a group of admiring ladies near the refreshment table. The atmosphere was festive and elegant, exactly what one would expect from a royal celebration. However, Lady Catherine noticed something unusual about the security arrangements for tonight's event. Royal guards were positioned throughout the ballroom at regular intervals, their red uniforms and polished armor gleaming under the chandelier light. This was not uncommon for important court functions, but tonight there seemed to be more guards than usual, and they appeared to be paying particular attention to the jewelry worn by the female guests. Lady Catherine observed one guard discreetly examining Lady Worthington's bracelet, while another was studying the pearl necklace worn by the Duchess of Millfield. She found this behavior strange, but assumed it was simply extra security due to the presence of foreign visitors. Princess Eleanor made her grand entrance shortly after Lady Catherine's arrival. The princess looked absolutely stunning in a gown of midnight blue silk, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate style and crowned with a delicate tiara. She moved through the ballroom with the grace and poise expected of future royalty, greeting each guest personally and ensuring everyone felt welcome at her celebration. When she reached Lady Catherine, the two women embraced warmly, and Eleanor complimented her friend on the beautiful emerald necklace. The evening proceeded pleasantly for several hours. Lady Catherine danced with various gentlemen, enjoyed conversations with old friends, and savored the excellent food prepared by the royal kitchen staff. She felt truly happy and relaxed, completely unaware of the dramatic events that were about to unfold. The Tears of Avalon seemed to glow more brilliantly than ever in the ballroom's romantic lighting, drawing compliments and curious questions from many of the other guests who had never seen such magnificent emeralds before. As the night wore on, Lady Catherine began to notice that the royal guards were becoming more active in their examinations of guests' jewelry. She watched with growing concern as they approached different ladies throughout the ballroom, engaging them in quiet conversations and sometimes taking notes in small leather journals. The behavior struck her as increasingly odd, and she began to feel a strange sense of unease, though she could not quite explain why. Little did Lady Catherine know that Princess Eleanor had received disturbing intelligence earlier that day about a plot involving stolen royal jewels. Someone had been selling fake copies of precious court jewelry and replacing the originals with clever forgeries. The princess had ordered increased security and thorough inspections to identify any suspicious pieces, but she had not had the opportunity to warn her friend about these unusual measures. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of their friendship and reveal secrets that had been hidden for decades. The clock had just struck midnight when Captain Marcus Thornfield, the head of the Royal Guard, approached Lady Catherine near the grand staircase. She was bidding farewell to the Duke of Westfield when the tall, imposing figure in his ceremonial red uniform stepped into her path. His weathered face was stern and businesslike, showing no trace of the warmth she had grown accustomed to during their brief interactions over the years. Something in his cold blue eyes immediately made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Captain Thornfield had served the royal family faithfully for over 20 years, earning his position through dedication, skill, and unwavering loyalty. He was known throughout the kingdom as a man of honor, who took his duties very seriously, never allowing personal feelings to interfere with his responsibilities. Tonight, however, he looked particularly grim as he studied the emerald necklace that adorned Lady Catherine's throat. His trained eye had been examining jewelry all evening, and something about her necklace had caught his attention in a way that deeply troubled him. The ballroom around them continued to buzz with activity as guests enjoyed the final hours of Princess Eleanor's celebration. Most people were unaware of the tension that was beginning to build near the staircase, though a few observant nobles had begun to notice the serious expression on Captain Thornfield's face. Lady Catherine felt increasingly uncomfortable under his intense scrutiny, wondering why he was staring at her jewelry with such obvious suspicion and concern. Without any preliminary conversation or explanation, Captain Thornfield stepped closer and spoke in a low, authoritative voice that only Lady Catherine could hear. His words sent a chill through her entire body and made her heart begin to race with both confusion and growing anger. He informed her that he had reason to believe her emerald necklace might be connected to an ongoing investigation involving stolen royal property, and that he would need to confiscate it immediately for closer examination by court officials. Lady Catherine stared at him in complete shock, unable to process what she was hearing. The tears of Avalon had been in her family for centuries, passed down from mother to daughter as their most precious heirloom. The suggestion that it might be stolen property was not only insulting, but completely impossible. She had documentation proving the necklace's history, including letters from previous generations, and even a painting from over a century ago that showed her great-great-grandmother wearing the same emeralds at her wedding ceremony. Captain Thornfield remained unmoved by her protests. He explained that several pieces of jewelry worn by guests tonight had already been identified as clever forgeries, and that orders had come directly from Princess Eleanor herself to investigate any suspicious items. The emeralds in Lady Catherine's necklace matched the description of stones that had recently gone missing from the royal treasury, and he could not make exceptions based on personal relationships or social standing. The conversation was attracting attention from nearby guests, who began to whisper among themselves as they observed the increasingly heated exchange. Lady Catherine felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and indignation as she realized that people were starting to stare and speculate about what was happening. The thought that anyone might believe she was wearing stolen jewelry filled her with a rage unlike anything she had ever experienced before. Despite her mounting fury, Lady Catherine attempted to maintain her composure and resolve the situation diplomatically. She offered to provide documentation of the necklace's history, and suggested that any examination could wait until the following day, when proper procedures could be followed. However, Captain Thornfield insisted that immediate action was necessary, and that the investigation could not be delayed simply for the sake of convenience or social propriety. As their conversation grew more intense, other guests began to gather around them, drawn by curiosity and the obvious tension in the air. Lady Catherine could see looks of shock, sympathy, and, unfortunately, suspicion on the faces of people she had known for years. Some seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare, while others appeared to be enjoying the scandalous drama that was unfolding before their eyes. The humiliation was becoming unbearable, but she refused to back down from what she knew was a terrible mistake. Captain Thornfield's patience finally reached its limit when Lady Catherine continued to refuse his demands. Without warning, he signaled to two of his subordinate guards, who immediately moved to flank Lady Catherine on either side. Their presence made it clear that this was no longer a request, but a command that would be enforced regardless of her cooperation. The captain informed her that she could either remove the necklace voluntarily or they would be forced to take more direct action. The ballroom had grown noticeably quieter as more guests became aware of the confrontation taking place near the staircase. Even the musicians seemed to sense the tension in the air and had begun playing more softly. Princess Eleanor was at the far end of the room, engaged in conversation with foreign diplomats, and appeared to be unaware of the crisis that was developing. Lady Catherine desperately wanted to call out to her friend for help, but pride and shock kept her from making such a public plea. Realizing that she had no choice but to comply or face even greater humiliation, Lady Catherine's hands trembled with anger as she slowly reached behind her neck to unfasten the clasp of the Tears of Avalon. The emeralds felt cold against her fingers as she lifted the necklace away from her throat, and she had to fight back tears of rage and wounded pride. The weight of the jewelry seemed to increase dramatically as she placed it reluctantly into Captain Thornfield's outstretched palm. The captain examined the necklace briefly before placing it carefully into a velvet pouch that he produced from his uniform. He assured Lady Catherine that the jewelry would be kept safe during the investigation and returned to her promptly if it was determined to be legitimately hers. However, his formal tone and professional demeanor did nothing to soften the blow of what felt like a public accusation of theft against her family's honor and reputation. As Captain Thornfield prepared to leave with his prize, Lady Catherine felt something snap inside her mind. All the anger, humiliation, and disbelief that had been building throughout this horrible encounter suddenly erupted in a way that shocked everyone within hearing distance, including herself. The explosion of Lady Catherine's voice echoed through the grand ballroom like thunder on a clear day, causing conversations to halt mid-sentence and champagne glasses to freeze halfway to startled lips. Her carefully maintained composure shattered completely as she unleashed years of pent-up frustration and wounded pride upon Captain Thornfield, who stood motionless before her with the velvet pouch containing her precious necklace clutched in his armored hands. Her words came out in a torrent of rage that surprised even herself with its intensity and volume. Lady Catherine accused the captain of being a pompous fool who had allowed his small amount of authority to go to his head, transforming him into a tyrant who delighted in humiliating innocent nobles at royal celebrations. She declared that his actions tonight had brought shame upon the entire royal guard and questioned whether he possessed even the most basic understanding of honor, dignity, or proper conduct befitting his position. The stunned silence that had fallen over the ballroom was broken only by Lady Catherine's furious voice and the rustling of silk gowns as guests shifted uncomfortably while witnessing this unprecedented display of defiance against royal authority. Many had never seen anyone, particularly a lady of noble birth, speak so boldly to a member of the guard, and they watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the scene continued to unfold before their eyes. Captain Thornfield's face remained impassive, despite the verbal assault being directed at him, though a slight tightening around his eyes suggested that Lady Catherine's words were having more impact than his professional demeanor revealed. He had faced criticism before in his long career, but never in such a public forum or with such personal venom behind the accusations. However, his training and years of experience kept him from responding emotionally to her outburst. Lady Catherine continued her tirade, her voice growing even louder as she gained momentum and courage from her own words. She reminded everyone within earshot that the Tears of Avalon had been worn by Blackwood women at royal functions for generations, including events attended by Princess Eleanor's own grandparents and great-grandparents. She demanded to know how Captain Thornfield could possibly believe that her family had somehow managed to steal and replace royal jewelry without anyone noticing. For over 3 centuries, the Captain attempted to interrupt her several times, trying to explain that he was simply following orders and conducting a routine investigation, but Lady Catherine would not allow him to speak. She accused him of being either incompetent at his job or deliberately malicious in his treatment of her family's reputation. Her anger seemed to feed upon itself, growing stronger with each word she spoke, as if years of subtle slights and social pressures were finally finding their voice. Princess Eleanor had become aware of the commotion and was making her way across the ballroom toward the confrontation, her royal composure intact despite the obvious concern in her eyes. However, the crowd of curious onlookers made her progress slow, and Lady Catherine's explosive confrontation with Captain Thornfield continued to escalate before the princess could intervene to restore order to her celebration. Lady Catherine's voice reached new heights of indignation as she accused Captain Thornfield of being a power-hungry individual who enjoyed terrorizing women because he lacked the courage to face real threats to the kingdom. She suggested that perhaps he should spend more time protecting the royal family from actual dangers instead of harassing loyal nobles who had done nothing wrong except attend a celebration while wearing their family heirlooms. The guests closest to the confrontation began to step back, creating a wider circle around Lady Catherine and the guards as her voice grew more piercing and her gestures more dramatic. Some looked scandalized by her behavior, while others seemed sympathetic to her plight, understanding how humiliating it must be to have one's integrity questioned so publicly. A few younger nobles appeared thrilled by the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. Captain Thornfield finally attempted to restore order by speaking firmly, but respectfully, reminding Lady Catherine that her outburst was inappropriate for a royal celebration, and requesting that she lower her voice out of consideration for the other guests. However, his words only served to inflame her anger further, as she interpreted his request as an attempt to silence her legitimate complaints and protect himself from justified criticism. Lady Catherine's voice cracked with emotion as she declared that she would not be silenced by someone who had just humiliated her family name in front of the entire court. She demanded the immediate return of her grandmother's necklace and threatened to lodge formal complaints with every authority figure in the kingdom if Captain Thornfield continued with his ridiculous investigation. Her hands shook with rage as she pointed an accusatory finger directly at his chest. The confrontation reached its peak when Lady Catherine, her voice now hoarse from shouting but still carrying clearly across the ballroom, made a declaration that shocked everyone present. She announced that if this was how the royal guard treated loyal subjects, then perhaps it was time for people to reconsider their allegiance to a crown that allowed such injustices to occur. The gasps from the assembled guests were audible, as such words bordered dangerously close to treason. Captain Thornfield's expression finally changed, his professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern about the direction the confrontation was taking. He realized that Lady Catherine's emotional state was causing her to say things that could have serious legal consequences, regardless of whether her anger was justified. However, before he could attempt to de-escalate the situation, Princess Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a sword through silk. The princess had finally reached the scene of the confrontation, and her arrival immediately changed the dynamics of the entire situation. Every person in the ballroom, including Lady Catherine and Captain Thornfield, turned toward the sound of Eleanor's authoritative voice as she prepared to address the crisis that had erupted at her own celebration. The princess's face showed a complex mixture of concern, disappointment, and determination as she surveyed the scene before her. Lady Catherine's chest heaved with exhaustion and emotion as she finally fell silent, suddenly aware of how far her anger had carried her beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior. The reality of what she had just done began to sink in, but the fire in her eyes showed that her fury was far from extinguished. Captain Thornfield straightened to attention as his sovereign approached, while the assembled guests held their breath, waiting to see how Princess Eleanor would handle this unprecedented situation. Princess Eleanor's calm but commanding presence immediately brought a sense of order to the chaotic scene, though the tension in the ballroom remained as thick as morning fog over the palace gardens. Her blue eyes moved carefully between Lady Catherine's flushed face and Captain Thornfield's rigid posture, taking in every detail of the confrontation that had just unfolded at her celebration. The princess understood that this situation required delicate handling, as the wrong words could damage relationships that had taken Years to build. Lady Catherine's breathing was still rapid and shallow as she struggled to regain her composure in the presence of her childhood friend. The reality of her outburst was beginning to settle upon her like a heavy cloak, and she felt a mixture of embarrassment and defiant pride that made her want to both apologize and continue fighting for her family's honor. The emerald necklace had represented so much more than mere jewelry to her, and its confiscation felt like a violation of everything she held sacred. The story of the Tears of Avalon began 3 centuries earlier during the reign of Queen Isabella, Princess Eleanor's ancestor, who had commissioned the necklace as a wedding gift for her dear friend Lady Margaret Blackwood. The emeralds had been personally selected by the Queen from the royal treasury, and the necklace had been crafted by the finest jewelers in the kingdom. However, the gift had come with a special significance that went far beyond its material value. Lady Margaret had saved Queen Isabella's life during a riding accident when they were both young women, throwing herself in front of a runaway horse to protect her royal friend from harm. The Queen had never forgotten this act of selfless courage, and when Margaret's engagement was announced, Isabella decided to honor her friend with a gift that would symbolize their unbreakable bond. The emeralds were said to represent the tears of joy that the Queen had shed when she realized her friend would survive the injuries sustained during the rescue. The necklace had been passed down through the Blackwood family with strict instructions that it should never be sold, given away, or used as collateral for debts. Each generation of women had worn it with pride, understanding that it represented not only their family's wealth but also their ancestors' courage and loyalty to the crown. Lady Catherine's grandmother had told her these stories countless times during her childhood, emphasizing the importance of preserving the family's honor and traditions. When Lady Catherine's grandmother lay dying 2 years earlier, she had called her granddaughter to her bedside for a final conversation about the necklace and its significance. The elderly woman had revealed that there were secrets surrounding the Tears of Avalon that she had never shared with anyone, mysteries that had been carefully guarded by Blackwood women for generations. However, before she could reveal these secrets completely, her health had failed, leaving Lady Catherine with only fragments of a larger story. The dying woman had whispered about hidden compartments in the necklace's setting and mysterious symbols carved into the emeralds themselves that could only be seen under certain lighting conditions. She had spoken of ancient documents hidden in the family's country estate that would explain the necklace's true purpose and its connection to the royal family's most closely guarded secrets. Lady Catherine had searched for these documents after her grandmother's death, but had never been able to locate them. Princess Eleanor stepped forward and gently took Lady Catherine's trembling hands in her own, speaking in a soft voice that only her friend could hear. The princess explained that she had not personally ordered the investigation of jewelry at tonight's celebration, and that she was as surprised as anyone by Captain Thornfield's actions. However, she also revealed that there had been concerning reports about forged jewelry circulating among the nobility, and that security measures had been increased as a precautionary step. Captain Thornfield stood at attention while the princess spoke, his face showing no emotion, despite the obvious tension of the situation. However, his mind was racing as he considered the implications of what he had just heard. The detailed history that Lady Catherine had shouted during her outburst matched information contained in classified royal archives that very few people had access to. If her story was true, then his investigation had uncovered something far more significant than simple theft. The captain had been following orders from a source he believed to be legitimate, but now he began to question whether someone might be using him as a pawn in a larger game. The instructions to confiscate certain pieces of jewelry had come through unusual channels, and he was starting to realize that he might have been manipulated into creating this embarrassing situation. His years of loyal service to the crown made the possibility of being deceived particularly troubling. Princess Eleanor asked Lady Catherine to accompany her to a private chamber, where they could discuss the situation away from the curious eyes and ears of the ballroom guests. She also requested that Captain Thornfield join them, along with the confiscated necklace, so that they could examine the jewelry more carefully and hopefully resolve the mystery surrounding its authenticity. The princess's diplomatic skills were evident as she managed to diffuse the public confrontation while maintaining everyone's dignity. As they made their way toward the princess's private study, Lady Catherine found herself thinking about her grandmother's mysterious final words and wondering if tonight's events were somehow connected to the secrets that had died with the elderly woman. The possibility that someone else knew about the necklace's hidden significance and was actively working to obtain it sent chills down her spine. She began to suspect that Captain Thornfield might be an unwitting participant in a conspiracy rather than its orchestrator. The private study was a comfortable room lined with books and illuminated by warm lamplight that created dancing shadows on the walls. Princess Eleanor carefully locked the door behind them before turning to address both Lady Catherine and Captain Thornfield. She explained that she wanted to examine the necklace carefully and hear both sides of the story before deciding how to proceed with the investigation. Captain Thornfield removed the velvet pouch from his uniform and carefully extracted the Tears of Avalon, placing it gently on the princess's mahogany desk, where the lamplight could illuminate every detail of its construction. The emerald seemed to glow with an inner fire that was even more pronounced in the intimate lighting of the study, and all three people found themselves drawn to examine the necklace more closely than ever before. As Princess Eleanor lifted the necklace to examine it under a magnifying glass, Lady Catherine noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. The light was hitting the emeralds at exactly the right angle to reveal the mysterious symbols that her grandmother had mentioned, faint markings that had been invisible under the ballroom's chandeliers. The symbols appeared to be some kind of ancient script or code that none of them could immediately interpret, but their presence proved that at least part of her grandmother's final story had been true. The discovery of the mysterious symbols carved into the emeralds transformed the atmosphere in Princess Eleanor's private study from tense confrontation to urgent investigation. The three individuals gathered around the mahogany desk found themselves united by curiosity and growing concern as they realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple case of stolen jewelry. The ancient markings seemed to pulse with hidden meaning under the warm lamplight, demanding closer examination and interpretation. Princess Eleanor carefully adjusted the angle of her magnifying glass, trying to capture the symbols more clearly, while Lady Catherine leaned in close enough to feel the princess's breath on her cheek. Captain Thornfield maintained his professional distance, but his eyes were fixed intently on the necklace, his military training making him acutely aware that they might have stumbled upon information with serious security implications for the kingdom. The symbols appeared to be a form of ancient script that none of them recognized, possibly predating the current royal dynasty. Lady Catherine's mind raced as she tried to remember every detail of her grandmother's final words about the necklace's hidden secrets. The elderly woman had spoken of documents hidden somewhere in the family's ancestral estate, papers that would explain the true significance of the Tears of Avalon and its connection to the royal family's history. She began to suspect that these symbols might be some kind of map or key that would lead them to those missing documents, if they could find someone capable of translating the ancient script. Captain Thornfield cleared his throat and spoke carefully, his voice showing none of the stern authority he had displayed in the ballroom. He explained that his orders to investigate certain pieces of jewelry had come through an unusual communication channel, one that he now realized might not have been entirely legitimate. A messenger had delivered written instructions claiming to be from Princess Eleanor herself, but the captain was beginning to suspect that someone had been impersonating royal authority to manipulate him into creating tonight's confrontation. The princess looked up sharply from her examination of the necklace, her blue eyes flashing with concern and anger. She confirmed that she had issued no such orders, and that the only security measures she had personally authorized were standard precautions for protecting foreign dignitaries. Someone had clearly used her name without permission to orchestrate the confiscation of Lady Catherine's necklace, which suggested a level of planning and insider knowledge that was deeply troubling. Princess Eleanor moved to her writing desk and quickly penned a note to her private secretary, requesting that all communications received by palace security over the past week be gathered for immediate review. She also asked for the royal historian to be summoned to the palace as soon as possible, as his expertise in ancient languages and historical documents might be crucial for interpreting the symbols they had discovered. The princess's actions demonstrated her understanding that they were dealing with a situation that required both discretion and urgency. While they waited for the historian to arrive, Lady Catherine shared everything she could remember about her grandmother's final words and the mysterious documents that were supposedly hidden at the Blackwood estate. She described her unsuccessful searches through the family's papers and her growing frustration at being unable to locate the information her grandmother had mentioned. The princess listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her own deep knowledge of historical events and family connections. Captain Thornfield excused himself to investigate the source of the forged orders more thoroughly, promising to report back with any information he could gather about who might have orchestrated tonight's events. His departure left Lady Catherine and Princess Eleanor alone for the first time since their childhood, and the familiar intimacy of their friendship began to reassert itself, despite the evening's dramatic events. However, both women understood that their personal relationship was now secondary to the larger mystery they needed to solve. The royal historian, Professor Edmund Whitmore, arrived at the palace within an hour of receiving the princess's summons. He was an elderly man with wild white hair and thick spectacles who had dedicated his life to studying the ancient history of the kingdom and its surrounding regions. His excitement was evident when he saw the symbols carved into the emeralds, and he immediately began examining them with specialized equipment he had brought from his private collection of historical research tools. Professor Whitmore's preliminary examination revealed that the symbols were indeed very old, possibly dating back to the early days of the kingdom's founding over 5 centuries ago. He explained that similar markings had been found in ancient ruins throughout the region, always in connection with hiding places or secret chambers used by early nobles to protect valuable items during times of war and political upheaval. The symbols appeared to be a form of coded directions that would lead someone to a specific location. The historian worked for over an hour, carefully copying each symbol and consulting various reference books he had brought with him. His translation efforts were painstaking and methodical, as ancient languages often relied on context and cultural knowledge that had been lost over the centuries. However, his expertise in medieval scripts and his familiarity with the kingdom's early history gradually allowed him to piece together the meaning of the mysterious markings. Lady Catherine watched the translation process with growing excitement and apprehension, understanding that they were about to uncover secrets that her family had guarded for generations. The professor's occasional murmurs of surprise and interest suggested that the symbols contained information of significant historical importance, possibly related to events that had shaped the kingdom's development during its earliest years. Princess Eleanor paced thoughtfully around the study while Professor Whitmore worked, her mind already considering the political implications of whatever they were about to discover. The fact that someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to obtain the necklace suggested that these secrets were still relevant to current events, which could mean that powerful people with hidden agendas were involved in tonight's conspiracy. When Professor Whitmore finally looked up from his work, his expression was a mixture of amazement and concern that immediately captured the attention of both women. He explained that the symbols contained detailed directions to a hidden chamber beneath the Blackwood family estate, along with cryptic references to documents that could alter the understanding of the kingdom's royal succession. The implications of his translation were staggering, suggesting that the Tears of Avalon was much more than a simple piece of jewelry. The historian's revelation cast tonight's events in an entirely new light, transforming what had seemed like a case of mistaken identity into something approaching a threat to the stability of the crown itself. Lady Catherine and Princess Eleanor exchanged worried glances as they began to understand the true scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered, and the realization that their childhood friendship had become entangled in matters of state that could affect the entire kingdom. The ancient documents hidden beneath the Blackwood estate revealed a truth so shocking that it threatened to shake the very foundations of the kingdom's monarchy. Professor Whitmore's translation of the symbols had led Princess Eleanor and Lady Catherine on a midnight journey to the family's ancestral home, where they discovered a secret chamber that had remained sealed for over 2 centuries. The papers they found inside told a story that explained not only the conspiracy surrounding the necklace, but also the true reason why someone was willing to risk everything to obtain it. The documents, written in faded ink on parchment that crackled with age, contained detailed genealogical records that traced the Blackwood family lineage back to the kingdom's founding. However, these were not ordinary family trees, but carefully documented evidence of a secret that had been deliberately hidden from official royal records. Lady Catherine's ancestor, Lady Margaret Blackwood, had not simply been Queen Isabella's friend and savior, but something much more significant that could alter the entire understanding of royal succession. According to the hidden documents, Lady Margaret had been Queen Isabella's half-sister, born from a secret relationship between the previous king and a woman he could not marry due to political considerations. The king had acknowledged Margaret privately and provided for her upbringing, but her existence had been carefully concealed to avoid complications with the official royal succession. The Tears of Avalon had been given to Margaret not as a gift between friends, but as a symbol of her rightful place in the royal bloodline. Princess Eleanor read the documents with growing amazement and concern. Understanding that their contents could completely destabilize the current monarchy if they became public knowledge. The papers included sworn testimony from court officials, detailed records of financial support provided to the Blackwood family over generations, and even copies of secret correspondence between various monarchs acknowledging their obligation to protect Margaret's descendants. The evidence was overwhelming and appeared to be authentic. The revelation explained why someone had orchestrated the elaborate conspiracy to obtain the necklace. If these documents were authentic, then Lady Catherine possessed one of the strongest claims to the throne in the kingdom's history, potentially stronger even than Princess Eleanor's own birthright. The symbols carved into the emeralds had served as a key to unlock this explosive secret, and someone with knowledge of the family's history had been working to either expose or suppress this information. Captain Thornfield's investigation into the forged orders had meanwhile uncovered the identity of the true mastermind behind tonight's events. The false instructions had been traced back to Lord Chancellor Victor Ravenscroft, Princess Eleanor's own chief advisor and one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. Ravenscroft had served the royal family for decades, gradually accumulating influence and authority that made him nearly indispensable to the crown's operations. However, his loyalty had apparently been corrupted by personal ambition and secret knowledge. Captain arrived at the Blackwood estate just as Princess Eleanor and Lady Catherine were finishing their examination of the hidden documents. His report revealed that Lord Chancellor Ravenscroft had been conducting his own investigation into the Blackwood family history for several months, apparently searching for evidence that could either eliminate potential threats to his power or provide him with leverage to control future monarchs. The discovery of the necklace's significance had prompted him to act quickly and decisively. Ravenscroft's plan had been cleverly conceived and almost perfectly executed. By manipulating Captain Thornfield into confiscating the necklace publicly, he had hoped to discredit Lady Catherine and create enough scandal to destroy her reputation before she could discover her true heritage. If the plan had succeeded, he could have obtained the necklace secretly and either destroyed the evidence it contained or used it to blackmail future monarchs into accepting his continued dominance. However, the Lord Chancellor had underestimated both Lady Catherine's fierce determination to protect her family's honor and Princess Eleanor's loyalty to her childhood friend. His scheme had backfired spectacularly when Lady Catherine's explosive confrontation with the royal guard had drawn the princess into the investigation, leading to the very discoveries that Ravenscroft had hoped to prevent. The irony was not lost on any of them that his elaborate conspiracy had actually accelerated the revelation of the secrets he sought to control. Princess Eleanor faced an impossible decision as she considered the implications of the documents they had discovered. As the current heir to the throne, she had both the authority and the responsibility to determine how this information should be handled. The revelation of Lady Catherine's royal bloodline could either strengthen the monarchy by demonstrating its deep historical roots or destroy it by calling into question the legitimacy of centuries of royal succession. Lady Catherine herself was struggling to process the magnitude of what they had learned about her family's history. The grandmother who had raised her with such love and care had carried this monumental secret throughout her entire life, never revealing the true reason why the Blackwood family had always been treated with special consideration by successive monarchs. The weight of suddenly discovering that she possessed a legitimate claim to the throne was almost overwhelming. The documents also revealed that previous monarchs had been aware of the Blackwood family's royal heritage and had deliberately chosen to maintain the secret rather than risk the political upheaval that full disclosure might create. Each generation of rulers had faced the same decision that Princess Eleanor now confronted, and each had chosen to preserve stability over complete historical accuracy. The pattern suggested that the current situation was not unprecedented but part of a carefully maintained balance of power. Captain Thornfield's investigation had also uncovered evidence that Lord Chancellor Ravenscroft had been in communication with foreign powers who would benefit from instability within the kingdom. His conspiracy against Lady Catherine appeared to be part of a larger plan to weaken the monarchy and create opportunities for outside interference in the kingdom's affairs. The revelation transformed what had seemed like a personal vendetta into a matter of national security that required immediate action. As dawn began to break over the Blackwood estate, the three conspirators found themselves united in their determination to protect both the kingdom's stability and Lady Catherine's newly discovered heritage. They understood that Lord Chancellor Ravenscroft's betrayal represented a threat that went far beyond personal ambition, potentially endangering the independence and sovereignty that their ancestors had fought to establish. The challenge now was to develop a strategy that would neutralize the immediate threat while protecting the long-term interests of everyone involved. The Tears of Avalon lay on the table between them, its emeralds catching the first rays of morning sunlight streaming through the windows of the hidden chamber. The necklace had served its purpose as a key to unlock centuries of carefully guarded secrets, and now its future would depend on the decisions made by the three people whose lives had been forever changed by the truth it contained. The confrontation with Lord Chancellor Ravenscroft took place in the throne room of Ravenswood Palace, 3 days after the discovery at the Blackwood estate. Princess Eleanor had carefully orchestrated the meeting to ensure that justice would be served, while minimizing the potential damage to the kingdom's stability. Captain Thornfield stood at attention beside the throne, while Lady Catherine occupied a place of honor that reflected her newly acknowledged status within the royal court. Ravenscroft entered the throne room with his usual confident bearing, apparently unaware that his conspiracy had been completely unraveled. His silver hair was perfectly groomed and his ceremonial robes displayed all the symbols of his high office, creating an image of authority and respectability that had served him well throughout his long career. However, his composure began to crack when he noticed the Tears of Avalon, displayed prominently on a velvet cushion beside Princess Eleanor's throne. Princess Eleanor's voice was calm but carried the unmistakable authority of royal command as she formally accused Ravenscroft of treason, conspiracy, and abuse of his position for personal gain. She presented the evidence that Captain Thornfield had gathered systematically, piece by piece, building an irrefutable case against the man who had served as her most trusted advisor. The Lord Chancellor's face grew pale as he realized the extent of his exposure and the futility of attempting to deny his involvement. The princess had decided to handle the revelation of Lady Catherine's royal heritage with wisdom that would have made her ancestors proud. Rather than creating chaos by immediately acknowledging a competing claim to the throne, she chose to honor the historical precedent established by previous monarchs. Lady Catherine would be formally recognized as a cousin of royal blood and granted a position within the court that reflected her true status while maintaining the stability of the current succession. Lady Catherine accepted this arrangement with grace and understanding, recognizing that Princess Eleanor's solution protected both their friendship and the kingdom's welfare. She had never desired power or royal responsibility, and the knowledge of her heritage was sufficient to restore her family's honor and explain the special treatment that the Blackwood line had always received from the crown. The Tears of Avalon would remain in her possession as a symbol of her royal blood and her family's centuries of loyal service. Lord Chancellor Ravenscroft's punishment was swift and decisive. He was stripped of all titles and positions. His properties were confiscated to compensate for the damage his conspiracy had caused, and he was exiled from the kingdom permanently. The evidence of his communication with foreign powers had been shared with allied nations to ensure that his influence could not be used to threaten neighboring kingdoms. His carefully constructed career and reputation were destroyed as completely as he had attempted to destroy Lady Catherine's. The revelation of Ravenscroft's treachery also led to significant reforms in how the royal court handled sensitive information and security matters. Princess Eleanor established new protocols for verifying orders and communications, ensuring that no single individual could manipulate the system as effectively as Ravencroft had done. Captain Thornfield was promoted and given expanded authority to investigate potential threats to the kingdom's security, his loyalty and competence having been proven through his role in exposing the conspiracy. The story of Lady Catherine's dramatic confrontation with the royal guard became legendary throughout the kingdom, though most people never learned the full truth about the events that followed. The official version described how a misunderstanding about stolen jewelry had led to the discovery of foreign agents attempting to destabilize the monarchy. Lady Catherine was publicly honored for her role in exposing the plot, and her passionate defense of her family's honor was celebrated as an example of noble courage. Professor Whitmore was appointed as the new royal historian and given the responsibility of maintaining the kingdom's historical records with greater accuracy and security. The hidden documents from the Blackwood estate were carefully preserved in the royal archives, where they could be consulted by future monarchs who might need to understand the full complexity of their heritage. The professor's expertise had proven invaluable, and his loyalty to historical truth over political convenience made him an ideal guardian of such sensitive information. The friendship between Princess Eleanor and Lady Catherine emerged from these dramatic events stronger than ever before. The shared experience of uncovering centuries-old secrets and facing down a dangerous conspiracy had renewed the bond that had formed during their childhood. They now understood that their relationship was not merely personal but part of a larger historical pattern that connected their families across generations. Lady Catherine's new position at court allowed her to serve the kingdom in ways that honored both her heritage and her capabilities. She became Princess Eleanor's chief advisor on matters involving the nobility and historical precedent, using her knowledge of family histories and court traditions to help resolve disputes and maintain harmony among the various noble houses. Her dramatic introduction to this role had demonstrated her willingness to fight for justice and her ability to stand up to authority when necessary. The Tears of Avalon continued to serve as a powerful symbol of the connection between the royal family and the noble houses that supported them. Lady Catherine wore the necklace at important state functions, where its presence reminded everyone of the deep historical roots that gave the monarchy its legitimacy and strength. The emeralds seemed to glow with renewed brilliance, as if the revelation of their secrets had somehow enhanced their natural beauty. Captain Thornfield's investigation into foreign interference led to the discovery of several other plots against the kingdom's security, proving that Ravencroft's conspiracy had been part of a broader campaign to weaken the monarchy. The captain's vigilance and dedication helped to strengthen the kingdom's defenses against future threats, and his experience with the Blackwood affair taught him valuable lessons about the complex relationships between personal loyalty, professional duty, and political intrigue. As months passed and the immediate crisis faded into memory, the kingdom settled into a new period of stability and prosperity. Princess Eleanor's wise handling of the situation had demonstrated her readiness to assume the throne when the time came, while Lady Catherine's integration into the court had enriched the royal circle with fresh perspectives and renewed energy. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy their friendship had ultimately revealed truths that made their bond unbreakable. The legacy of these dramatic events would influence the kingdom for generations to come, serving as a reminder that loyalty, courage, and friendship could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts at deception and manipulation. Lady Catherine's explosive confrontation with the royal guard had begun as a defense of personal honor, but had evolved into something much larger, a battle for the very soul of the kingdom that had been won through unity rather than division.